Hey there, welcome back. Today we're talking about topic 3.8, due process and the rights of the accused. In this lesson, you're going to learn how the Constitution protects those accused of a crime. Prior to the Bill of Rights, the Constitution did provide some protections when it came to being accused of a crime. Article 1 prevents Congress from passing ex post facto laws, or laws criminalizing conduct that was legal at the time it occurred, or bills of attainder, or laws passed by Congress punishing an individual without a trial. Those accused of a crime also have the right to request a writ of habeas corpus, or a document setting out the reasons for an arrest or detention. And all defendants have a reasonable expectation to procedural due process, or the judicial standard that fairness is applied to all individuals equally. This is basically asking whether the government has followed the proper procedures when it takes away life, liberty, or property. So there are two types of due process. First, due process is where the government is not allowed to deny citizens life, liberty, or property without going through a legal process. So the first type of due process is procedural due process, and this addresses the manner in which the law is carried out. So this is asking the question, were the steps leading up to a trial fair? Did the police have a warrant? Was the search legal? Were the steps of the trial carried out properly? That is procedural due process. Then there is substantive due process, and this addresses the essence of a law. Is the law in question that this person supposedly broke, is it in and of itself fair? Does it violate basic rights? There are several amendments that we're going to look at that protect the rights of those accused of a crime. The first is the Fourth Amendment. The Bill of Rights protects citizens from unreasonable searches, though it's not always easy to determine whether or not a search is considered unreasonable. To that end, in order for the government to be allowed to search your person or property, they must have what's called a warrant, or a document that's issued by a judge authorizing a search. Warrants have to be based on probable cause, or the reasonable belief that a crime has been committed, or that there is evidence of criminal activity. There are a few exceptions to this rule, like when the police are in hot pursuit of a suspect. The Fourth Amendment was incorporated to the states in the case of Mapp versus Ohio, in which the home of Dolry Mapp was searched without a warrant while they were investigating a bombing. Instead of finding bomb material, though, the police found material that violated the Ohio anti-obscenity laws. The Supreme Court overturned her conviction and stated that any evidence found in the process of an illegal warrantless search must be excluded. It's considered fruit from the poisonous tree. The court has put some restrictions on how the government has used modern surveillance techniques. The court ruled that evidence obtained from cell phones cannot be used without a warrant. The government must have a warrant in order to use evidence from your cell phone. The rights of those accused of crimes are continually having to be reimagined due to an increase in technology. In 2001, the federal government passed the Uniting and Strengthening America by Providing Appropriate Tools Required to Intercept and Obstruct Terrorism, or the USA Patriot Act. They worked really hard to make that acronym work. This gave the government huge amounts of power to request and obtain telecommunications metadata. Basically, all the information off of your cell phone. In 2015, though, Congress passed the USA Freedom Act, another act where they worked really hard to make the acronym work, but I'm not going to bother you with the actual full name. This was a response to the information that was leaked by Edward Snowden, which we've already talked about, which showed just how much data the United States government had been gathering on its citizens without warrants and without their knowledge. The Freedom Act reduced the amount of metadata the United States was legally allowed to capture on U.S. citizens without warrants. However, critics of both of these laws state that they do not conform to the ideals set out in the 14th Amendment, which we talked a lot about in our last topic. The Fifth Amendment provides for procedural due process in federal cases. Those suspected of having committed a crime must have an indictment handed down by a grand jury, or a group of citizens who decide whether or not a person should be indicted on criminal charges and tried in court based on evidence. Basically, they get to look at the evidence that the prosecution has gathered, and they decide whether or not it's enough to actually try you in court. Once acquitted, so once you've gone through the whole trial process and you have been acquitted of a crime, or you've been told that you are not guilty, citizens are protected from being charged with the same crime again in the same jurisdiction. That's called double jeopardy. However, a person can be acquitted in state court and then be tried again in federal court under federal charges, because those are two different jurisdictions. In 1963, Ernesto Miranda was arrested and confessed to kidnapping and rape, all without being given the opportunity to have an attorney present. In 1966, the Supreme Court overturned his conviction and sent it back down to the lower courts, saying that prior to any questioning, the person must be warned that he has a right to remain silent, that any statement he does make may be used as evidence against him, and that he has a right to the presence of an attorney. Does that sound familiar? It should. They're now called the Miranda rights that police must give to suspects while they're being arrested. This leads us to the Sixth Amendment, which grants defendants the right to a speedy trial, which was incorporated to the states in 1963. It also grants the right to an impartial jury, which now is made more difficult because of these. News comes straight to our phones all the time. We know about almost anything because of what's in our pockets. For most of our history, though, the Sixth Amendment granted the right to an attorney only if you could afford one. This changed in 1963 with the case of Gideon versus Wainwright. Clarence Gideon requested an attorney, but was denied since he couldn't afford one. He represented himself and was convicted to 5 years in prison. While in prison, he petitioned all the way up to the Supreme Court, saying that his Sixth Amendment rights had been violated because he hadn't been provided an attorney. For his Supreme Court case and hearing, he was appointed an attorney, and the Supreme Court agreed with him. In the state of Florida alone, almost 2,000 people were freed because of this case. And it helped to create the public defender system that we have today, imperfect as it may be. Recently, the court has even strengthened these protections by trying to ensure that defendants receive not just legal representation, but effective legal representation. The Eighth Amendment prohibits excessive bail, or the amount of money posted as a security or deposit to ensure a defendant shows up for court. You are only granted bail in certain circumstances. If a defendant cannot afford bail, they must remain in jail until the end of their trial. It also protects from cruel and unusual punishment. While there have been some cases of cruel and unusual punishment, most cases related to this clause of the Eighth Amendment refer to capital punishment, also known as the death penalty. The Supreme Court has ruled that the death penalty does not violate the Eighth Amendment, with some exceptions, which we've talked about. But here they are again. The death penalty is not permissible in use for cases where the defendant is under the age of 18 at the time of their crime, or for defendants with significant cognitive disabilities. In this lesson, you should have learned how the Constitution protects those accused of a crime. If there's anything you missed, please go back now and watch that portion of the video again. Then, go ahead and answer the summarizing question in your notes so that you can receive a stamp the next time you come to class. All right, guys, we'll see you later. Bye.